Take my wife, please. I'm not saying she's ugly, but when she went to see a horror film, the audience thought she was making a personal appearance. Well, it's always been an element of the horror film to show us the gross out. I mean, that's one option for all filmmakers making a horror film, and it's not something I've found myself above either. The normal storyline of a horror film or a slasher film is the young, beautiful college folks go camping and get systematically killed by the person in a mask. So that's how it normally is. I love when you go to a horror film with real horror fans and everybody's there watching, getting involved and screaming. That's when it's most alive and exciting for me. Bhoot is a hold-on-to-your-seats horror film, while Darna Manaa Hai is a hold-on-to-your-popcorn horror film. Wes Craven is obviously a horror film icon, so I was definitely very interested in bringing something back to life that Wes had created. I think so much of the horror film is about our primal instincts, and our primal instincts are not just towards violence, it's also towards sex. I feel like horror movies, as much as they're about violence, they're also about sex. It's about our instincts, so in that regard, it's crucial that you honor both of those things. After my film The Tale of Two Sisters, I received a lot of offers from Hollywood to direct, but because A Tale of Two Sisters was a horror film, I received a lot of horror films. But I wasn't interested in working in the same genre, and the scripts I received for films in different genres were for projects that were near completion. I don't have a horror film in me just because I don't like to be scared, but I definitely have a documentary in me, and I certainly have dramas. I got a horror film, The Burning, and suddenly I was making crazy money, like $1,000 a week, so I moved into an apartment on Amsterdam with a guy who was also in The Burning, Jason Alexander. I don't understand it, but every horror film is huge. I would consider one, but I don't know if my heart would be in it. I was imagining films in my head and trying to gather friends together to make movies since I was a kid. I tried to do comedy skits and a horror film. I believe singing should be like being an actor. People shouldn't have any problem buying an actor being in a comedy or a drama or a horror film. That should be the same way with music. I'm not a director to make an action or horror film. That's not for me. Dark Circles is a great relationship/character piece and also a horror film. It tinkered with the genre, which I loved. I was sick of seeing the same thing, sick of people just trying to get a movie made. So I was asked to do horror film after horror film, a series of about 5, after that, and some of those were a little too gruesome. I wasn't too comfortable all the time in those. I didn't really care for them. I don't care how inventive you are, once you introduce strings into the ensemble for a horror film, you're entering into a world where a tradition has been thoroughly established. So its repeated use over the years is like, oh God, another film with strings, another spooky movie with strings. The Quiet Ones was my first film, let alone my first horror film, and I had so much fun. I had such a laugh, every single day. I looked like such a feral child in it. I'd never watch a horror film, but after I found out I was going to be in one, I watched, like, 4 of them, including The Shining. I was terrified, I couldn't sleep for days. But I wanted to get myself used to things I was going to see on the set. Any time a new horror film comes out that looks appealing, I'm always excited to go see it. I didn't even know what a horror film was. I kind of made it up as I went along. I'm always a fan of a good horror film. I just want to be with great teachers. If that means I'm in a horror film with good teachers, I'll do another horror film. But I would love to branch out and do more comedy or just more straight dramas. It's not scary to make a horror film because you get to pull back the curtain and see that none of it's real. When you're watching one, the terror bombards you. If one horror film hits, everyone says, let's go make a horror film. It's the genre that never dies. I set out to do a horror film with dog soldiers, and what I came out with at the end of the day was something that was more of a cult movie, more of a black comedy with some horror elements in it. It kind of went over the top. The first horror film I remember seeing in the theater was Halloween, and from the first scene when the kid puts on the mask and it is his POV, I was hooked. I actually do like scary movies. I used to hate scary movies. You know, when I was young, I saw The Changeling, with George C. Scott, which I think is the scariest movie ever made. After I saw that, I swore I would never see a horror film again. Then I started making them. Horror film fans are pretty starved for quality. If you do something thoughtful or if you make something good, they're so thankful for it. In some ways, the audience becomes complacent when they go to a horror film, and so it's fun to take that attitude and then to append it. Scream was great for what it was. For a horror film, it was intelligent, it was funny, it took a laugh at itself. I laugh a lot in horror films. If I'm scared in a horror film, I try to think about what's scaring me, particularly if it's a bad movie, but something they're doing still works. It's the same way I look at comedy. I've always had an intellectual view of comedy, and what makes people laugh, and how does it work. I hope one day that I'll get to make another horror film. I'd love to. It's gotten to the point where it's big news when I don't do a horror film. Everyone has the opportunity to do a horror film. There's something great about it as an actor. You have to go to places you'd normally never go and be put in situations you would never be put into. You don't get the opportunity in a lot of films to have this kind of acting. It's an interesting challenge. I think there's a lot of elements that go into making a really awesome horror film, and that's like putting together like a real good group of people that you love to watch them either live or die. It's funny. I can sit through the worst horror film ever made, but even a quite good romantic comedy can drive me nuts. I'm just one of those people that if I sit down to watch a horror film, I put my hands over my face and I cry a lot and I don't see half of the film because I'm too upset. My first horror film was, well, I don't know. Bless the Child is sort of genre, but May was such a cult hit that after that, I just started getting offers for horror. I think I got a little bit pigeonholed in it right off of May because there was just such a large response to that film. Pakistan now is like a horror film franchise. You know, it's Friday the 13th, episode 63, The Terrorist from Pakistan. And each time we hear of Pakistan it's in that context. The scariest movie I have ever seen, and my favorite horror film is The Exorcist. It is a must-see horror/thriller classic. I watch it every couple of years. Why should a horror film be just a horror film? To me, The Company of Wolves is a fairy tale. It's got all those elements plus a lot more. And we know that fairy tales aren't innocent anymore. Fear has disappeared. No more fear. In Asia, it is different. They've discovered again the fear and the psychology of the characters. Without psychology, the horror film doesn't exist. Psycho is probably the best known example of a horror film whose exclusive sound was strings, and since then, it's been hard to avoid that. The minute you have strings as your primary voice, the comparisons are always made. And I'm auditioning right now for a movie, and then I have a script that I'm reading right now for a horror film, and I'm meeting for a couple of television shows that I just had yesterday, and pretty much was offered one of them. I was never a big fan of horror. I got into it making these films, but I don't ever see myself doing slasher movies. The kind of horror film I like is The Shining. I don't really like slashers, but I love thrillers with tension. I really respond to human scripts that are raw and real and risky. I love playing scary characters, not horror film scary, but vulnerable scary. I would much rather watch a horror film or science fiction than a comedy. I don't know why. I just like them. I find them relaxing. I don't know how I didn't kill any one of my sisters. For this one horror film we were making, I made my own harness for my sister. I wrapped her in all these ropes, but then also put a noose around her neck and hung her from a tree. Now I think, what if my harness didn't work? I'm so lucky that nothing ever happened. I've always been fascinated by Asian culture, and I love that women can play the lead in a horror film. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.